and you weigh the right things on the right side and the wrong things on the wrong side.
Cosine equals 87 divided by 105, the square root of 105.
I mean, I can't always be their little girl. It's not a nightmare. It's not a dream. It's not something I imagined. Believe me.
Suffering, pain, sadness, tragedy. These things intrude even into the lives of the very young. Perhaps more disturbing, some children suffer intentional abuse and neglect. Such maltreatment can take many forms, often at the hands of the very people responsible for their care.
Sometimes I want to scream. Sometimes I want to smile. Sometimes I want to cry. Just for a little while.
With the right support, some children cope with and even bounce back from pain. For many others, however, abuse or neglect poses an ongoing risk to their normal growth and development.
Would you believe me if I cried? Would you believe me if I died? What can I do to make you believe me?
It's a child abuse prevention center, and we use that. We take that in that
In all cultures, adults have a special responsibility for children and power over them.
My husband, he really doesn't like to talk about his problems, so you probably won't ever see him here. I'm just here because I want to learn more about parenting, and
we define child abuse according to our consciousness of what's good for children as opposed to what's bad for children, and that's changed over the centuries. We used to put children into apprenticeship and hard labor. We used to punish children severely, and children could be beaten to death and still have that excused as the discipline of parents. In this century, and only in the last 25 years, we in this country have defined certain things as abusive and forbidden, so that now there's a limit to how severely you can punish a child.
No one thing causes child abuse. Child abuse is, you can think of as a conspiracy, a variety of factors that overwhelm a parent's capacity to cope and provide the nurturance they would like to provide for their child. I think each of us, in some respects, is capable of being a child abuser if we were put in the situations that child abusers often are.
In a way, child abuse depends on the balance between the needs of a child and the needs of people who are responsible for caring for the child. So often, in an abusive situation, the adult has no real sense or no real caring, at least at that moment, for what the impact may be on the child.
Why are they being mean to him?
They're bad guys.
Oh, what makes them bad?
Victims of abuse, such as Johnny, often suffer profound emotional turmoil.
Johnny comes from a very, very chaotic background. His mother physically abused him. She put a gun to his head, to he and his brother's head. And Johnny will tell you now that the gun was not loaded, but nevertheless it was a gun, a very frightening thing. He saw his mother stab his stepbrother. He saw physical abuse between his mother and his father.
Linda Scarlino at the Florence Crittenden Institute oversees therapy for abused children like Johnny, who is learning to cope with the trauma of his physical and mental abuse.
He would bite, kick. He threw himself through a window. He took a pair of scissors and went after another staff. So he was sent to us because they felt that he would do better in a group home. He would also get the psychological kind of services that he needed. One day Johnny came in my office and he was looking at some pictures I have on my wall. I have pictures of cats and a wolf, and I have a postcard of a little girl walking down a dirt road, and the end of the road is a house. And he started telling me about the story that he saw in that picture of a little girl, and she was in this house because there were mean people in there. And he ended up by saying, but she got out of the house, and she was okay, she was safe. So then I took a magazine and I had him look for pictures that he liked, and he cut them out, and we started doing these collages. Johnny doesn't talk very much about the kind of physical abuse or sexual abuse that he has, but through the pictures he's able to describe a lot of the feelings he has inside. It's not Johnny who's talking, it's he can look at a picture of a child or whatever and talk about the child's abuse or people being mean to someone else. Okay, tell me about this picture.
Those guys are in handcuffs because they're doing mean things to other people.
That's a pretty picture. What do you see in this picture?
He's trying to take care of him because his mommy and daddy are not there.
Oh, where is Mommy and Daddy?
They're gone.
Many of the pictures Johnny selects reflect past violence in his life. Others reveal his emerging sense of security and hopefulness.
Okay, tell me about this picture.
The dog eats water in his plant.
Huh, how neat.
He's in the snow, and he's happy because he's in the snow because it's warm for him.
Oh, he likes it there. All right. In this picture here, Johnny mentions that the man is getting dressed to go out and play with his friends, and he's going to play with guns. And I said, well, why? What's going to happen with the guns? And he says, well, they're going to go and they're going to shoot at targets, and they're not going to hurt anybody. Which to me is a significant thing for him to say, because now he realizes that guns are not just to kill, that you can use a gun in a very safe way with targets, and this is not going to hurt you or hurt me or hurt anybody. What can you tell me about this picture? When Johnny first came to us, he was extremely aggressive. He always saw things as bad. He was bad, people hurt people, guns hurt people. I think he's come a long way, if you notice that in some of the pictures that he did. The children or any of the characters that are in those pictures, they ended up being okay. They ended up being safe. The monkey was in a cage, but I believe the monkey was okay afterwards. The little child that he talked about with the angel was being protected by this woman. So he doesn't see only negative things now. He sees that there is good and things can change. In fact, one day he said to me that someday maybe he'll go to a foster home, or maybe he'll go back to his mother and she won't be mean to him anymore.
Children at all ages suffer abuse, but toddlers are particularly at risk. Self-centered and emotionally demanding, adults often find toddlers exasperating.
The littlest kids, in that way, are the most vulnerable to cruel punishment and physical battering, partly because they don't fight back, partly because we get a greater sense of absolute power in our ability to totally control them, and also partly because little kids are so young and unformed in their own ideas. We take permission to control them more, to take possession of them, and to do anything it takes to make them act right.
Adults typically raise their children the way their parents raised them. For some families, this tendency can have lasting consequences.
How does that affect your kids? They freak out, they cry, they scream,
Yeah, it's not a good environment.
And to this day, I mean, this happened almost 3 years ago. To this day, the 10-year-old daughter still says, I remember when Dad beat you.
And probably the most distressing legacy or consequence of child abuse is its probability of being intergenerationally transmitted. That is, an abused child who is insecure, let's say, insensitive to others' pain, aggressive or depressed, now growing up, having their own child, and mistreating them.
I started realizing they weren't saying that to me as a cut down. They were saying that to me because that's a fact. I went for what I knew. I went for abusive behavior because I knew abusive behavior, and that's what I was comfortable with.
Now, it's really important to point out that that intergenerational linkage from one generation of abuse to fostering another generation is by no means inevitable. But it does happen.
And I was just like, I can't deal with this, you know? I can't deal with the drinking because my mother was an alcoholic.
Each of us have moments of abusive and neglectful behavior toward our children, balanced often by times of great empathy and caring and nurture. It's a matter really of a balance, how much of the time or how determined a parent may be to be removed from or unavailable or punishing and abusive to a child. We make arbitrary lines that some things are very bad for children. What we haven't learned to do yet is define what's really good for children and what a minimum amount of caring and growth we owe to our children.
The long-term effects of abuse are not the same for all children. Research shows some seem to cope significantly better than others. However, this resilience in the face of adversity depends on a number of factors.
Humans are self-blaming in general. When there's a doubt, they say, there must be something wrong with me. And if that's the conclusion a child comes to, then that's going to be pathognomonic for the future. Because not only did you have a bad life, but now you're saying, must be me, maybe I'm not a lovable child.
The age at which abuse happens may have an effect, a differential effect on how the child relates to that, how it affects his later life. Children in the first couple of years of life are almost totally self-absorbed, and so they blame themselves for what's happening. A little later, they also understand that what's going on is weird, and they may be able to wonder what's wrong with the other person for treating them that way, and so they're not quite so self-damaging in that way. And later still, children have enough identity and autonomy of their own to be more resilient against outside things that are happening.
If for some reason, which I'd give anything to know what it is that leads a small proportion of children in that circumstance to realize at 15, it's got nothing to do with me. Life's a crapshoot. I just happen to have the bad luck to be born. There's nothing wrong with me. You're home, free. Those are the ones who grow up and say, no, everything's fine. That's powerful in resilience.
Almost invariably, resilience depends on the presence of a positive, supporting adult. In the absence of such a person, circumstances can overwhelm the child.
If the only thing that's wrong is that there's a parent that has mental illness, or that the mother's divorced and there's a single parent in the family, or that the family is poor, or that there's a lot of children, those children will turn out all right. As long as it's an or. When it becomes an and, then it becomes a difficult situation.
Sometimes you can have parents who themselves have everything that a child needs, and who have the optimism and the resilience and the love and care and resources to provide for a child. But when the child leaves the front door, he may walk into a war zone where people are being killed, mugged, mistreated, where things are ugly and dirty, and there's no sense of hope within that bright soul searching that the parents have tried to give. That can be as abusive and perhaps more scary even than the internal world of abuse.
We've identified families with 7 or 8 risk factors. When we look at those families with 7 or 8 risk factors, and we look for children who are doing better than would be expected, we don't find any. That is that there are some environments that are so overwhelming that you never see a resilient child. And the question I would ask is, where we do see resilient children, is it in the child, or is it in the fact that there really weren't that many risk factors? Indeed, there are children who are more adaptable than other children. But adaptability is part of development. That's what we all have to do. That's part of every child's developmental course. A child has to adapt to interacting with their parents. They have to adapt to new playmates, to babysitters, to schools. That's what development is always all about. And if there was no adaptation, there'd be no development. So I don't see resilience as being any different than normal development.
Sexual abuse is a very peculiar form of abuse. The child has to adapt to being sexually assaulted and has to come to believe that that's a necessary, proper part of his world, and has to believe that even though the outer world acts as if it doesn't exist and wouldn't be tolerated. That's a mind-blowing, mind-shattering kind of experience. It doesn't allow for trust.
Tragically, a child can be coerced into trusting the wrong person.
A common scenario is that a child will come in and they may have been abused by somebody within the home or outside the home, but one of the dynamics that you see is that these children have some kind of ambivalent feelings about this perpetrator. There has been an adult in their life that has tried to form some special relationship with them.
If a 4-year-old is being sexually assaulted by the man across the street, and the child's mother thinks that the man across the street is a neat guy who is teaching him how to use tools in the shop, then the boy can't help but assume that mom is deliberately placing him into that abusive situation that mom knows, even when at the same time he's following the threats from the man across the street not to tell anybody, and how bad it's going to be if anybody knows, and how his mother would throw him away if she knew what he was doing in the man's shop. So the child, naturally, from a developmental point of view, thinks that he's responsible for what the outer world is doing, but he's also taught by the behavior of both his mother and the man across the street that his place in the world is to be a sexual victim.
While typically adults commit sexual assaults against children, recently a little-known and particularly disturbing aspect of child abuse has come to light.
Hi, Teresa. Hi. I'm Sandy. This must be Danny, is that right? It's nice to meet you, Danny. I heard a lot about you.
We work with children that have been molested and now find themselves acting in sexual ways with other children. We call them abuse reactive because we see the behaviors that they participate in or initiate with other children as a response to what's happened to them. We often see them doing real similar things that were done to them to other children. For example, if a child was fondled or made to do certain things, what we find is that in response to their anxiety or their emotions, they will do that with other children.
Danny, we're going to go in here and play today. We got some toys in here. We're going to have lots of fun.
For 6-year-old Danny, abuse has led to sexually reactive behavior that goes beyond what adults sometimes refer to as playing doctor.
Children may be across the board curious about what do people's sex organs look like and that kind of stuff. What we find is that seems to be more of a stage with children that haven't been sexualized. They're curious about it and then they go on to the next thing. What we find with these children that have been abused and are reactive is that it's an ongoing theme. It's always prevalent.
Danny, I have some special dollies for us to see. I have to have you teach me a little bit about, do you know what good touches and bad touches are?
In working with these children, we see empathy. The development of empathy is a very, very important component to their treatment. And what we mean by empathy is their ability to feel what other people feel and to put themselves in somebody else's position, to try to take them out of that egocentric realm where everything is only important if it revolves around me. When they can feel what other people feel, often it reduces their motivation to act out sexually, because we find that to empathize really is a deterrent to hurting somebody else.
What would be a good touch?
There does seem to be some kind of window period where in young life, this is a developmental stage, you know, building empathy and learning how to feel what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. And if they miss that developmental stage, what we find is that as adolescents, late adolescents, and as adults, it's very, very difficult to go back and pick that piece up.
But most especially, the great impact of sexual abuse is emotional. The scars heal. The scars of physical abuse will heal. But one's sense of self, one's sense of self-hate, one's sense of not having a worthy place in the world, nothing positive to contribute, that stays as a psychological scar.
The effects of abuse on a child's development go much deeper than you typically see at age 5 or 6. These are children who are victims of extreme abuse, and the emotional issues facing these children are going to be with them for a very long time. I also have seen adult survivors of abuse, and some of these adult children are 30 and 40 years old and still working through the issues that they faced at age 3. So abuse isn't something that affects the child and then goes away. It's something that is a lifelong thing for many people.
Most people readily understand the damage caused by child abuse. However, the effects of neglect, sometimes overlooked, can be devastating as well. In 1945, Dr. Renee Spitz recorded these scenes in a Latin American orphanage. Though fed and kept clean, these children received little physical, social, or emotional stimulation. Many died. A more recent example of neglect shocked the world as the media reported on the treatment of children in Romanian orphanages under the failed Ceausescu regime.
Well, children are in cribs in long rows. These would be children below the age of 2, 2.5. And I think the thing that's striking to any of us was that they would just lie there. They were the most passive children I had ever seen. I thought that I'd always learned and taught that children are naturally active. And for once I saw children who weren't naturally active at all. They just lay there. These children were so passive because nothing they did made any difference in the world. They weren't fed when they were hungry. They were fed when the bottles came around. They were diapered when it was time to diaper them. They could cry, but no one would come, so it didn't matter, and so they didn't cry. They could smile, but no one had time to smile back, so they didn't smile.
Bunny. Bunny? Close. How about a birdie?
Neglect is not always brutal. Sometimes, merely failing to meet the child's everyday needs for love and interaction can impair normal development.
We have one son. He's 2 years old. His name's Tommy.
Tommy? He's red?
Yeah.
Tommy was referred to me because his language skills were delayed, resulting from childhood neglect. What that means is even though he was able to understand everything that people were saying around him, no one had taken the time to sit down and really talk to him and make language, expressive language, meaningful. When you have a child as an infant and a toddler, you need to talk to them, give them the names of things, tell them how things work, and this way the child starts imitating, and this is how language develops.
In a child that's neglected, it's not always the case that they don't get fed and they don't get changed and they don't get bathed. It's very often a case of more of a social neglect or an interpersonal neglect, where the child does not get enough individual personal attention from the parent, the caregiver. That can give rise to feelings of abandonment, feelings of being alone in the world on the part of this child.
Car.
Tommy is 27 months old. When I saw him originally, his expressive language age was at the 16-month to 18-month level. He was able to understand everything at his age level, but he was having difficulty expressing himself. A child may have receptive language that is within normal limits for his age because there's usually things happening in his environment. There's radio or television, particularly television, where a child can be put in front of a television set to keep them calm and entertain them, give them something to do, which your child can listen, but there's no way the child interacts. It doesn't require any verbal expression to sit in front of a television set, but the interaction of making language meaningful as a tool for him to manipulate his environment, that was not occurring.
And this one is yellow?
Yellow.
Oh, what good talking.
Tommy will be able to reach his chronological age as far as language skills very easily. There's no reason with a little intervention, language stimulation, a little bit of speech and language therapy, he's going to be within normal limits for his age.
the chance to go to the speech therapy and get the help that he needs, maybe, if the speech therapy is what he really needs. And the fact that now it's recognized that we had a drug problem, and now we are in a drug program, and we go to parenting classes, we go to drug classes 3 times a week, and I feel that if it hadn't happened, we'd probably still be doing drugs, and Tommy could probably still be somewhere with us having problems, and it would not have been recognized.
Take the time I hug him and I hold him. That just is not enough for him.
Most adults are concerned about the care of the young, but parents, child care professionals, entire communities face larger issues in the struggle to do what is best for children.
It's the parents who don't come, who don't reach out, who don't ask for help, who don't look into the community for resources that really are in trouble, and their children are in trouble. So
in Western society, it's not really clear anymore what children are good for. We don't need them to share the work of the family. Much of what we view in them is our own future after we're gone. We want them to fulfill our destiny. We want them to be exactly what we want them to be, and it doesn't give a whole lot of room for a child's development along his own lines. So there's more projective identification. There's more punishment of children for not being what we demand them to be.
Physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. Each leaves an emotional wound that poses risks to normal development. Unchecked, abuse and neglect can create a living nightmare, overpowering the natural ability to cope with the challenges of life, crushing the very spirit of the child. But with the right support, encouragement, and unconditional caring of compassionate adults, these most innocent of victims stand a chance of regaining a childhood lost.